The Choose Love movement offers no-cost solutions that keep our kids safe, providing them with the skills and tools they need to flourish. Join us in our mission to create the world we want to live in, one that's connected and compassionate. Check us out at chooselovemovement.org. Together, we can choose love.
Hello to all of our listeners. Welcome to the Choose Love podcast. It's so wonderful to have you here with us today. And I want to, I use this as a platform to share my beautiful friends and all of their incredible wisdom. And this week we have with us Meena, who is a thought leader. I'm going to read just a little bit about you, but I want you to introduce yourself. But Meena, I met in person at Omega when she was giving a presentation. She actually was hosting an event. And I just want to read what the event was called because I just loved it so much. Obviously, it was called Reclaiming Love and Joy in Ourselves, Our Schools, and Our Communities. It was at Omega. It was last July. And it was such a beautiful event. We were just at the CASTLE conference, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, Emotional Learning, and we ran into each other. That was a huge event. The event at Omega was much smaller. It was beautiful. Meena is and I'm going to read this from your TED Talk, if you don't mind, because I want everybody to make sure that they listen to that as well. She is a seasoned educational leader, celebrated speaker, accomplished author, and visionary entrepreneur. She has over 2 decades of dedicated service and has always been an educator activist at heart. She is championing the fusion of mindfulness and social emotional learning. And in 2022, you were featured as one of Mindful Magazine's 10 Powerful Women of the Mindfulness Movement. You are a prominent voice in the field. You focus your speaking and writing on emotional intelligence and belonging. You are the creative force behind SEL Everyday online courses and the author of 2 influential books, Teach, Breathe, Learn, Mindfulness in and Out of the Classroom, and SEL Everyday, Integrating SEL with Instruction in Secondary Classrooms. The latter was honored as one of 2019's favorite books for educators by the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley. Pretty amazing feat. And Thich Nhat Hanh also gave you an incredible shout out by saying that Meena is a precious ambassador of mindfulness. Thich Nhat Hanh, of course, being the Nobel Prize nominee and such an influential force in the mindfulness field. I love Thich Nhat Hanh and all of his teaching. So thank you so much for being on the Choose Love podcast, Meena. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you, Scarlett. I'm so grateful to be here, and I'm so touched by your boldness and just the language of choose love, just the sense that in each moment we have a choice. We can choose love or we can choose fear. And it's just so powerful that you, from tragedy, have just sparked this movement about love, which is something that I feel really is at the heart of the social and emotional learning work and the mindfulness and education work. So just really happy to be here and to connect with your community.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's actually all about love. And I have to tell you that after 10 years ago, I will say, when I started, I got a little bit of pushback about the word love. Like choose love? Could you rename the movement? Could you call it something else? It makes people a little uncomfortable to say that word. We're not sure that that's going to be successful. And, that was Jesse's message, nurturing, healing, love. And I said, no, it shouldn't be uncomfortable because it's something that connects us all as human beings. It's a want and need that we all have, that when we lack that love, connection, and belonging, we suffer. And I have to say that 10 years later, I see the word. I don't have the pushback anymore. In fact, I was at Bradley Airport, and that is in Connecticut. I was recently flying out, and I saw "Love Your Journey," and it was a big, huge banner. I actually took a picture of myself pointing to this, sending it to my team, saying, wow, this love word is out there now. It's in a lot of advertising campaigns for products, and that's okay, because I think the more love that we see, the more that we think about it, the more it becomes in our vernacular, the more comfortable we are with it, and it's powerful.
Very powerful. Yeah. Yeah. And and the last chapter of my second book is social emotional learning. What's love got to do with it? And I think, you and I, we've been meaning to meet for so many years. And finally, the universe has put us together in the right place at the right time. But for me, this work and really, being an educator, it's a practice of love. And for me, it's really important to think about love as a practice, as a choice, as something that we orient towards on a daily basis of just opening our hearts a little more, and really choosing in the moment to move in the world in a more loving way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, can you share a little bit? Like, usually I think when someone is so outspoken and so in a space, considered a thought leader, there's a story behind that. There's a reason for it. Everybody knows my story, but I'm wondering what yours is. What put you in this space? Why are you so so adamant about supporting social emotional learning and schools as well as mindfulness? Is there something that happened personally for you that put you here?
Sure. Well, there's many stories, but I'll just start with I'm the child of Indian immigrants who came to this country. My dad came in 1970. My mom came in 1973. And when you grow up as the child of immigrants, there's a lot of emphasis on, we came here with nothing and making it. And making it is definitely more focused on that kind of external success. I'm so grateful that I grew up in a household that also nurtured my inner life. And what I mean by inner life is cultivating a relationship with the interior, understanding that I am not my emotions, I am not my thoughts, but that these are things that I experience, but they're not the core of who I am. And a lot of that is connected to my spiritual upbringing, and I think that is what motivates me. And for me, teaching has always been a sacred task. So I didn't think I would ultimately be an educator. I was on track and wanted to be like a foreign news producer. And when I graduated from college,
Can I ask a question? Can we go
sure.
back just a second? Because you said
Yeah.
that was in your upbringing. It was in the spirituality of your upbringing, to know that you are not your emotions, you're not your thoughts and feelings. And so how did your parents help you come to that place? I'm just curious as a
Yeah,
mom, but
totally.
as also somebody who knows that parents are listening, obviously, and educators that are parents. But it's so interesting to hear you say that. I've never heard anybody say it in that way. And then, there's another question. So if you're not those, who are you? And I'm just curious about both those questions.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it is baked into, the cultural upbringing. I find in the West, there's like an inherent dualism, right? The subject, object, mind, body. And in a lot of Eastern traditions, I'll speak from my own ancestral tradition, there really is this emphasis on the integration of the mind and the body. And in fact, when people talk about mindfulness, they think it's your mind, but in Sanskrit, the word chit also means heart, this heartfulness. And so I'm grateful that as a young age, I remember like going to like yoga camps and like really being able to explore and cultivate a sense of embodiment. And for me, embodiment is really this integration of the mind and body, and not necessarily privileging the mind over the body, but recognizing the power that comes when they're working in concert with each other. And so you asked, if I am not my emotions and if I'm not my thoughts, who am I? Well, who am I think is the most important question we all need to be asking ourselves. Who am I?
Mm-hmm.
And there is a great Indian philosopher, Ramana Maharishi, who is from the same ancestral community as me. And he's sort of known as being famous for self-inquiry and really this exploration of who am I? And for me, when I think about the core of my inner life practice, it's to strengthen the observer, strengthen the witness. So I recognize that that all of these experiences I have throughout my day are objects of observation. And the observer is me, the witness is me, the person that is awake to the unfolding of life is the core of who I am. And so, I have a 5-year-old. And so we talk a lot about, all right, what are you feeling right now? Where are you feeling it in your body? And, the famous phrase, like, this too shall pass, just helping him recognize that emotions are data. They are important, valuable information that tunes us into what is happening in this moment. And I often, when I think about working skillfully with emotions, and I never talk about controlling emotions, it's always like, what can I learn? How can I skillfully work with or manage them? It's kind of like, all right, what am I feeling? Where in my body am I feeling it? And all right, ooh, I'm feeling some tension here in my chest. What is that? Well, I think that might be a little bit of fear. And then sounds a little woo-woo, but I do live in California. All right, fear, what are you trying to tell me right now? What are you trying to communicate to me? And so when I talk about our interior life, it is deepening our capacity to be the witness to what's unfolding, and there's an interplay with the external and the internal. So even when I think about mindfulness, it's not just breathing, it's not just, being in the present moment, it's holding a dual awareness in real time. And that dual awareness is what's happening internally and what's happening externally, and cultivating our capacity to hold that dual awareness so we have more agency. So we're not hijacked, by what's unfolding in the moment. And just imagine if everyone had these skills, right? Because I was reading recently, only 1 out of every 3 adults can actually accurately identify what they feel when they're feeling it. And that's why, I think we have so much reactivity and suffering in the world. And so, for me, I'm just so profoundly grateful that I had an upbringing where there was an encouragement to, I love how Mark Brackett says, to be a scientist, not a judge, to be curious about what's unfolding for me internally and externally.
Mm-hmm. That's so beautiful. So we have what we call a choice moment, where we get into the present moment, this space in between what's happening and our thoughtful response. We only have 2 choices when something happens. We can react, and that's usually out of habit and memory, or we can thoughtfully respond with love. But you need curiosity first, just to pause, to think about it, like you said, which I don't think is woo-woo at all. We need to comprehend the data that's coming into us. And by the way, our fear center is 4 times faster than our prefrontal cortex. So we actually need to pause to give our logic and reasoning center time to come online. And that curiosity helps us to figure out how to thoughtfully respond with love. And that's using our formula. But I love what you said about controlling emotions, because I think that has been one of the focuses that I've heard of, that we want kids to do, is like control your emotions. But the thing is, those emotions are evolutionary. They're simply information. So really, to pause and get curious about what those emotions are. We actually can't really control our emotions. We can control our feelings, but our emotions just come. And as you said, not to be a judge, but to consider them. So beautiful. Everything that you said, really amazing to know that we're not our feelings. And that, especially with some of the statistics that were shared in the last conference where we just were, a nationwide education conference in Atlanta, was that 5,400 teens attempt suicide every day. And to understand that you are not those really difficult feelings, that is trying to tell you something, and that will pass. That will pass. It is so important. So then it puts mindfulness and what you're talking about in the limelight of being able to foster hope in our kids, and they need this.
Yeah, well, I think, one of the most powerful, philosophical teachings in my upbringing is just to the valuing of impermanence, because impermanence also means that, like, emotions change, they shift, nothing is constant, nothing is constant. And so can we welcome that into our worldview and how we move through life and navigate the complexities of life, and just remember that that things shift and change, and we do have some agency around that as well.
Yeah, that agency part is really, really important. But you don't have agency if you're going around reacting to everything. You do have to take that time. You do have to get in touch with your emotions and see what they're telling you, to be able to thoughtfully respond. So important. So, okay, I'm sorry I stopped you, but that was just
it's all good. Well, trying to remember. So yeah,
Wait, you wanted to be a reporter?
I wanted to be a foreign news producer. It was so interesting.
Okay.
So I had internships, like I worked at an NBC affiliate. I was like an associate producer when I was in college, up in New England. I went to Amherst College, and you said Bradley Airport, and I'm like, I know, I used to fly to Bradley all the time when I was an undergrad at Amherst. And then I remember interning at Reuters in London. I spent a year studying at the London School of Economics, and I had a job lined up at the ABC network when I graduated from college. But in my heart, I was being pulled to kind of defer that job for a year, and I actually moved to Brazil, and I taught at an international school, and I never thought I'd be an educator, but I was teaching in Sao Paulo. And well, two amazing things happened that year. The first is that a lot of people would come up to me. There's not a lot of people of Indian origin there, and they'd say, "Você Indiana, teach me about, spirituality and yoga." And I'm like, "I'm from Jersey and I grew up playing soccer." But I did have a spiritual foundation growing up. But it really opened up a pathway for me to delve deeper in some of these ancestral practices, and of all places, Brazil. And then my professional development, my first ever teaching job, my professional development was to read Parker Palmer's The Courage to Teach. And there's so much in that book, but just to begin my teaching career with the understanding, as Parker Palmer says, we teach who we are, and to really be able to focus on integrating my inner life with my profession, and to approach teaching as a sacred task. So then I went to New York. I did work at the ABC network, but every day in my heart, I just knew that my life was meant to go in another direction. So after about a year there, and I'm so glad I had that experience, because I don't have any regrets now about this kind of other life. If those movies, one of them is Sideways. I'm trying to think of those movies where you have like the two different paths. Like I had a window into the other path. And that really began my career as an educator. And I've been an educator for more than 20 years. And I had an opportunity to teach in a variety of schools, public, private, international. And really from the beginning, this work around social and emotional learning and mindfulness was the foundation of teaching and learning. So before mindfulness was like a thing, I was kind of like that teacher that was doing all this breathing and reflective stuff with her kids. And it's really funny now because students find me from like close to 20 years ago and they're like, oh my gosh, Miss Srinivasan, we were doing all this stuff in your class in 6th grade.
Aw.
um and after being in the classroom for a little over a decade, one of my mentors, Linda Lantieri, who co-founded Castle and is really, one of the founders of the field of social and emotional learning, was just sort of coaching me around what might be next. And my first book was coming out at that time, around really from more of a practitioner's perspective of integrating mindfulness into the classroom. And this is part of the first wave of the mindfulness and education books. So this is more than 10 years ago. And a job opened up to work in partnership with Castle in Oakland. And so I got my admin credential and I worked on the systemic implementation of social and emotional learning for 5.5 years. And in that work, what I saw was that implementation was only really effective when you had leaders who embodied emotional intelligence and an equity consciousness. And that led to co-founding Transformative Educational Leadership with Linda and with another colleague, Daniel Reckstoffen. And we met because we're a year-long fellowship that really focuses on cultivating the inner lives of school leaders so they can engage in outer transformation in their school communities. And we're 50% leaders of color, really focused on building a beloved educational community. And in addition to this year-long fellowship that we hold, and we've had more than 143 leaders and have touched more than 400,000 students since our beginning in 2018, we also hold an annual conference, which is where we met because when we landed on the theme, and every year when we come up with the theme, we really listen deeply to the field. And we just knew, instead of surviving burnout, we're like, no, we're going to talk about reclaiming love and joy. And we just knew we had to have you there, Scarlett, given the theme of love, because I feel like you've been, ahead of your time and doing this work before, SCL has become a thing. But really the boldness to talk about love, because I think at the core, without love, how can we flourish? How can we learn? It's really at the core of everything.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. I agree. And so is mindfulness. So is being aware, self-aware, which is one of the social emotional learning skills, being aware of what we're feeling, what we're doing, and how that is impacting other people, social awareness as well. Yeah, so incredible. And so that led you to kind of this concept, and I've watched a few of your videos as well, but I've also had the pleasure of hearing you talk, and I'm actually sitting here going, oh, I'm so happy to have Meena all to myself for an hour. This is incredible, and share you. But also this concept of inner being. When did that kind of come into your life, and
Yeah.
why is that important?
Beautiful question. So I'd say inner being, it also is kind of sort of been rooted in my philosophical upbringing, but I can trace back the exact moment. So
And what does it mean when you're going through this, please?
yeah. So I'll describe interbeing as a word that we really can't define, but I'll offer a little window into what it means. So after I finished graduate school, I kind of woke up in the middle of the night and had this like inner voice that said, you got to move to India. And of course, my parents are like, we left India like 50 years ago. Where at that time it was more like, 35 years ago. But I moved to India. I taught at the American Embassy School, but was really there to nurture my my interest in contemplative practices. and also connecting with my ancestral traditions. And so while in India, I had the great opportunity to be in the presence of Thich Nhat Hanh. And
Mm,
I'll never forget the moment I first heard the term interbeing, like really heard. I'd read his work.
mhm,
So it was the anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi's birth at the site of Mahatma Gandhi's martyrdom. And that evening, in this profound weaving of birth and death, Thich Nhat Hanh invited us all to be a continuation of Gandhi, to continue Gandhi's legacy, really, of love.
mm,
And he introduced this term, interbeing. Now, interbeing can be sort of loose. Again, I don't feel it's something we can like define, because it's something you experience through insight. It's something that you experience um, through your living and your practice of deepening your awareness. But it's refers to the interdependent nature of reality. And so in a beautiful illustration of interbeing, Thich Nhat Hanh once wrote and has said many times that if you look deeply at a piece of paper, you'd see a cloud floating in the sheet of paper. If it wasn't for the cloud, there'd be no rain and there'd be no trees. So the cloud is essential for the paper to exist. If the cloud is not there, the sheet of paper cannot be there either. And he goes on to say, if you look deeply enough, even deeper, you could see the logger who cut down the trees and the logger's ancestors as well. And so for me, interbeing is really a shift in consciousness where we move in the world understanding that there are an infinite number of causes and conditions at play at all times. Nothing exists independently. I'm products of my parents' genetic material. I am products of the farmer who grew the oranges, and all of the processes that involved in the orange juice being in my cup this morning that now is inside me. All my students that I've taught live inside me. They are part of me. And I
mm,
continue on. And in a way, Scarlett, you're in me through
mm,
our connections, right?
mhm,
So interbeing is a real shift from this transactional way of moving in the world towards a way of understanding just the deep interdependent nature of reality. And when we move in the world with an interbeing consciousness, how can we not act when we see injustice? How can we not move to alleviate suffering? So interbeing and compassion are deeply, deeply connected. I think sometimes people feel, oh, compassion, that's like a soft thing. You just are feeling, um, you're feeling sorry for someone, but compassion is not pity.
right.
Compassion is being able to really feel with someone, but then having the motivation to act to alleviate suffering. It's
Mhm,
not passive at
mm,
all. And I feel like that motivation is strongest when we are moving in the world with this deep embodied understanding of our interdependence.
mhm. It's so beautiful. I remember being in a presentation by Brendan. Uh,
Ozawa
yes,
Silva? Yes, yeah,
yes, from Emory University, and he
yeah.
had this question that he asked, and he said, how many people do you think are involved in making a sweater? Now, I thought I was going to be clever because I have a farm, I raise sheep, I have, I know that you need to shear the sheep, you need to wash the wool, you need to spin it. And so I was trying to be clever in my response. And I thought, well, gosh, I can list off right away, like maybe 10 people, but I'm just going to expand it to 20. And then I'm going to expand it to say 50, because I'm sure that, he's trying to make this point that there are so many people involved. And the amazing thing was, I think that he came back with like I think it was like 100,000 or something like mind blowing, like what? And he's like, yeah, you didn't consider the truckers that, and like all of the people. And it just keeps going, how we are so dependent, interdependent on one another. And, we think that things that are happening, on the other side of the world don't impact us, but they do.
Well, think about COVID, right? If anyone like was on the other side around this interdependence thing, I think COVID has proven, right? Just the how interrelated and interdependent everything is.
Right. Right. That was, I will never forget that. And I always wish that I had his slide, because things kept popping up, and it was just absolutely filled with little icons, hundreds and hundreds of icons of how this wool got to us. And it was really amazing. So I love that concept, and I think it's really important. And then you also talked about another concept at Omega, which really sparked my interest, because I haven't heard anyone talking about it. And it's almost kind of like, I'm talking about nurturing, healing, love because of Jesse's chalkboard message, but you brought up this concept of tenderness. And that's
Yeah.
what we talked to the audience about. And I thought, wow, we need that in our
Mm.
lives. We need tenderness. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to that
Sure.
concept and why it's so important, and how, here's the other thing, like all of these things are so important, but how do we bring them into our daily lives? How do we do this for ourselves? How do educators do this with kids and their own children? How can we get more of what we've been talking about? That's a loaded question, and it's going to take probably the rest of our podcast and time together to answer, but it's so important.
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for responding in the way you did, because I remember after I gave that talk and I was sort of unveiling a new piece of work that I'd been exploring. And you're right, it's not, tenderness is profound, but often overlooked. And so I'll just kind of, rewind a little bit that, I do a lot of public speaking. And over the years, people have always said to me, like, so you haven't done a TED Talk yet? Like, that's crazy, Meena. You like speak all the time. And my answer would always be, it's not the right time. When the universe sends a message to me that the world is meant to hear, but it's really coming from the universe through me, like, I'll know. And that happened earlier this year. It was literally like a visceral, I could feel it, um, you know, sense of how important this exploration of tenderness has been in my own life. And it kind of put me on this journey of deepening my own understanding. And again, this is not something that's out there. I'm actually working with an emotion scientist now, and it's the subject of my next book. And there's a TED Talk that I did. I did do the TED Talk a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's in post-production out. It'll be out soon, but we'll also be sharing like a guide to make tenderness come alive in your life. So it's not just a talk, but a way that you can delve deeper into the topic. And for me, the tenderness, I've been playing with this. And one of my best friends, who is a professor at the University of Adelaide, and we actually met up in the Himalayas trying to study Hindi close to 20 years ago. And she was visiting me from Australia. And we were talking a lot about this concept of radical love and how powerful it is, how important it is, but how inaccessible it can feel. And I shared with her, something that's been coming to me a lot in my meditation has been exploring tenderness. And she stopped and she said, tell me more. And then I kept sharing with her, well, for me, I feel like tenderness is a pathway to interbeing. For me, tenderness, how I define it, is a heart-opening, expansive energy that melts a sense of separation with all life. And it melts that sense of separation, not just with humans, but with all life, with nature, And for me, it was a pathway. It was a pathway to feeling this felt, more embodied sense of interdependence. And tenderness is also embodied. It is somatic. It is something we feel. I feel like sometimes these concepts that are grand, that like compassion or empathy, or they can feel too big, they can get in our head. But when you invite someone to touch into an experience of tenderness or a feeling of tenderness, they will immediately drop into their body. There is a softening that happens. And for me, tenderness awakens me to vulnerability. And it's interesting, I believe there's this whole chicken and egg thing with vulnerability and tenderness. Like, do you need to have vulnerability to have tenderness? Or do you need to have tenderness to have vulnerability? And I think it's both. these are all the things I'm like getting into the real weeds around, like really exploring as we try to come up with a conceptual model for tenderness. And it's possible that it's part of the larger compassion family. But I do believe with my whole heart, and again, I'm not a scientist, I'm a practitioner, but in my school of meditation, we really go deep to understand the texture and the quality of emotions. What does it feel like in my body? I can go through a practice and I can really communicate the difference between, solidity and warmth, how that feels different in my body, or confidence and care. Like I really have spent time touching into what these things feel like in my body. And for me, tenderness is the sense of warmth, the softening that happens. And when I think about all that's unfolding in our world right now, where we have the armor up, right? We are not open. That tenderness can be a powerful pathway to a softening, to an opening. I think for me, when I'm able to touch into tenderness, definitely for myself, I think that tenderness, it starts with tenderness towards oneself, being able to hold oneself with that warmth. And then there's also ways we bring it into our lives. So in Omega, I talked about, emotions as states or traits, right? And ultimately, most emotions, they're both, right? And a state is something we experience in response to something, and a trait is something that we cultivate through deliberate practice, more like a disposition or a way of being. And I noticed that my son was diagnosed with a rare disease earlier this year, and we were rushed to the hospital. And I was more present than I'd been since he was a newborn. And I, like the doors to my heart flung open and tenderness poured out. And I really asked myself, why did it take such a drastic circumstance for me to come more fully home to my tender heart? And could I cultivate this way of being that is so exquisite, that is so warm and inviting and instantly, disarming, like people open up, you feel that connection, that sense of interbeing in a way. And I found a couple of things, and maybe if it's okay, you asked like how, so the how, Meena. So I'm going to share a couple of ways. There's several, but a couple of ways that have helped me, I think, move in the world in a little more of a tender-hearted way. And the first is this concept of wabi-sabi. So wabi-sabi is my husband's Japanese, and it is a Japanese concept that really acknowledges the beauty of impermanence and imperfection. And so like the cherry blossom tree is like the epitome of wabi-sabi, it only graces us with their brilliance for a fleeting period. And so for me, just in my day with nature, I started to just awaken to this appreciation of impermanence. I live in Southern California. We don't have seasons the way you do in Connecticut, but there is a change of weather I'm experiencing now as we move into fall, and leaves do change color here, not like on the East Coast where I grew up, but I'm touching into the delicate beauty that surrounds me. And so it's a softening, right? It's a softening, and I'm awakened to nature in a much deeper way when I employ this wabi-sabi way. It's like you touch into the fragility of all life. And it actually reminds me of a practice that I learned in the Thich Nhat Hanh community. And in 2010, I ordained into this lineage called Tiep Hien, which literally means the order of interbeing, where I'd say we commit to this path of cultivating an interbeing consciousness is our like ultimate life goal, is the best way that I would explain this commitment I made when I ordained into this community, into this spiritual community and this path. And so the practice is called the 3-breath hug, and I do it with my son. Probably need to do it with my husband more. But it involves, and this is sort of my own kind of spin of it, but with the first breath, hey, I'm not going to be here forever. And with the second breath, you're not going to be here forever, especially in your like adorable, but sometimes frustrating 5-year-old little self, right?
Yeah. Wow.
So with this last breath, let us cherish this moment.
Ooh.
And I tell you, this 3-breath practice instantly puts me in this embodied sense of tenderness. And when my husband and I are having a moment, and anyone who's been married for a long time or long-term relationship, no matter how much you love the person, you're going to have stuff come up, but we'll look at each other. We have the awareness, or we're like, 3-breath hug. All right. Instantly reminds us back into what matters, what's important. So
That
this practice,
is incredible.
yeah. And when you have consent, so I'm talking about my husband and my son, but with people I cherish in my life too, really, because you're breathing in, right? You're breathing, so you're instantly in your body. So it opens you up to being, not in your head. And ultimately, like I said before, tenderness is not, you don't think yourself into being tender. You tap in, you feel your way in. It is embodied. And, Scarlett, I feel like so much suffering in our world comes from us being disembodied. We are not living in our bodies. And so whatever we can do to integrate the mind, body, and spirit is so vital for us to be living, to be fully alive. So that's a practice I love, the
That's
3-breath
incredible.
3-breath
I
hug.
love that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, a practice that's really rooted in the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh. I think I might have put my own little unique spin on it, but that's what we do when we're practitioners, right? We receive a practice, we play with it, and I'd say anything that I share with anyone, I always say, hey, make this your own. This might work for me. It may not work for you. There are multiple pathways into awakening. There are multiple pathways. So that's just one that's powerful for me. And I mentioned wabi sabi, just this like orientation around like impermanence and the fragility of life. Can we awaken to that a little more? And I just think about how powerful it is for you to live on a farm and for you to live this more integrated life with seasons and nature. And I think so much of our modern living really cuts us off from things that contribute to our well-being. So I have a couple more, but I want to see if you have questions about tenderness. And, like I said, I'm in the midst of like this is the next body of work. At least it's what the universe is telling me, girl, this is the next, the world needs this. So,
yeah, I mean, just profound stuff. When I think of tenderness, the first thought that I had was thinking about looking at a baby, my baby or any baby, that feeling that kind of comes over you. It is that softening. It is that kind of leaning inward, and just the enveloping, the embracing, the love that that you feel for someone for some younger child that can't take care of themselves. They're totally dependent on you, and it just brings something out in you. Yeah, so I just love it. I love it. And I think about I'd love to hear more ways to bring it into the classroom, but at the same time I'm also thinking about how it can help us in the world that we have today, where there is an algorithm of fear that is being sold to us through advertising and the media, because fear sells. And so, you're not going to click on a headline unless it grabs your attention. It's not going to grab your attention unless it seems dangerous. And our brains are actually attractive to that because we want to survive. And that's our brain.
Yeah, we're evolutionarily designed to privilege the negative over the positive. So this work, is deliberate practice. And, so when we talk about you describe the feeling of tenderness with the baby, it's like, that's the state, right? Like we're experiencing it in response to something. And the trait is, can we find a pathway to cultivate this? So it is more of a disposition, a way of being, and both are supportive. And I would like to invite listeners to play with tenderness towards yourself, because there's, oh, especially educators, we are holding
Mm.
so much. And can we hold ourselves with that same warmth that we would embrace a vulnerable baby with? Can we just like soothe ourselves with tenderness? I think of mindfulness as the ultimate embrace. And it's funny, years ago, I organized a program when I was living in India with John and Mila Kabat-Zinn at my school. And John did this experiment. He's like, all right, think of a thought and hold that thought with your awareness. And he's like, what's greater, your awareness of the thought or the thought? And I'll just say, I've done this with some people who are like, the thought is bigger than my awareness of the thought. So it's not always that your awareness is greater than the thought. But for me in that moment, my felt experience was, wow, this practice of mine, it is like the ultimate embrace. And I think of tenderness. And for me, at least, I think my felt sense of tenderness has deepened since becoming a mother, just this sense of like, even when I think about in my upbringing, like the great mother, there's a fierce tenderness, there's an all-encompassing tenderness, that is maternal. But we all have the feminine and the masculine inside of us, and we need to balance that out, the yin and the yang, and it's funny because I've talked with some men who are like, oh, I can't be tender. But I think it's all in how you perceive and understand tenderness. For me, tender-hearted leadership is a leadership that gives permission for others to show up in their fullness with their vulnerability. And without vulnerability, we can't cultivate authentic relationships. So it's, however you do that, in a way that feels authentic to you. But the first step is, I think, for anyone listening, if you're curious about tenderness, just play with this in your own life. Like, what does tenderness feel like in your body? When do you feel tender? When you experience tenderness, pay attention to the quality of your interactions, and to just conduct your own experiment. It's funny, at Castle last week, we were both in Atlanta at this big conference doing, I was doing all these sessions, you were leading all these sessions. And one of them, I gave a talk called Leading for Belonging, Try a Little Tenderness. And it was all about how, I wear this little bracelet on my wrist that says Bridge Builder. And I wear it as a reminder to really be deeply committed to advance a world built on belonging. And whenever I feel an inclination to break, that little symbol on my wrist reminds me to bridge. And for me, to bridge, to be a bridge builder, requires me to move in a tenderhearted way where I recognize like our humanity, our fragility, that we all just want to be loved. We all just want to be seen. We all just want to feel like we belong. And so, the last line of my talk was, when you feel an inclination to break instead of bridge, try a little tenderness. So I'll invite folks, like when you feel that wall come up with someone, to just see if you can take a breath and just touch into what would it be like to meet this moment with tenderness. And it probably starts with tenderness towards yourself, but what would it mean to meet this moment with tenderness?
That's so beautiful. And I wasn't even actually thinking about tenderness towards ourselves. I was solely focused on kids. And you're right about the role of vulnerability. And that's hard when you're in an environment that is very stressful, as education is today, with trying to catch up with the academics from COVID and the other issues, the increased amount of trauma that's coming in, the behavioral issues that that the educators are seeing, the social delays from the lockdowns. I mean, all of this is kind of swirling around on our educators. And I always call our educators the modern day superheroes of our times. They are boots on the ground, showing up in their classrooms, putting their best foot forward every day. Those of you who are listening to this podcast and you're still listening, you are absolutely just a phenomenon in my mind,
And
because
mine too. And I
yeah.
don't know if you know this, Scarlett, but teachers make more decisions during the course of the workday than any other profession except surgeons. And so they are holding so much. And so definitely, taking those moments, I practice sometimes wait time in the classroom. Teachers who are listening will know what I mean by wait time. Take a breath. Can you touch into tenderness in that moment?
Mm.
And, I think so often we can lose that because there's just so much. We lose that connection to our bodies and to the sense of like, oh, these little people, they are so vulnerable. And what would it look like to cultivate a disposition of tenderness in the classroom, that warmth, that gentle care, that nurturing? I mean, I think tenderness, that survival of the human species depends on tenderness, right? That
Absolutely right.
it's a critical part of nurturing love.
It is.
And nurturing love as parents, but as educators, we are nurturers. And so finding our own pathway to what tenderness looks like, feels like, and sounds like in our body, in our being, and in our classrooms in a way that feels authentic and safe and right for
Mhm.
you.
Mhm.
For me, again, it's like, can we build the bridge? Can we soften? Can we touch into that sense of interbeing, right? Throughout our day. And the more practices we engage in, these micro practices where we get out of our head and into our hearts, is what can really make a difference in our well-being and in the well-being of all the young people that we serve, and in everyone in our lives, our loved ones, our colleagues, our friends, even strangers.
And then every time we do that, it's wiring our brains towards love through neuroplasticity and pruning from the fear channels. And it ripples out because people notice. You notice that person who is very centered and who maintains calm in the midst of chaos. And this is a really important practice, but I will say it might be the one thing that goes initially when all hell breaks loose in a classroom, in a home. I think we may lose tenderness first. So
Mm.
what would be a practice that, when we're just feeling like we're losing it, and in the middle of just a storm, what's another practice that educators could use, that people that are working in corporations can use, that parents can use, to bring us back into that place of tenderness when we've lost it?
Totally. Well, some folks who are listening are probably familiar with the Gottmans and the amazing work they've done on marriage and the research on relationships. And I often talk about the practice of turning towards. And while, turning towards refers to um, uh, acknowledging and responding to bids for connection. And bids for connection are any attempt a partner makes verbally or non-verbally to connect with their partner. Now, I believe this concept of turning towards and meeting bids for connection extends far beyond romantic relationships, that every moment is an opportunity to turn towards. And they followed couples through the first 6 years of marriage. And what they found is that the couples who stayed together turned towards each other and met their partner's bids for connection 86% of the time or more. And these bids are small. It's not like wanting to have a heart to heart. It's literally like, I think of my husband will say, it's going to be sunny today. He'll make a comment about the weather. And instead of me ignoring it, engaging, turning towards, even like physically turning towards. We are on our devices, right? We are not turning towards.
That's
And
right. Oh,
so,
beautiful. It's excellent.
I think in a school, if we turn towards each other more in a school or in the workplace, even just acknowledging a smile, a hello, whatever it is. And again, in ways that feel authentic and true to us, it will be transformative. We're nowadays so conditioned to be like on our devices, and they're really pulling us away from all it means to be human. So
Yeah.
this practice of turning towards is vital. And I'd also say, we talked earlier about curiosity, but just being curious. I know that a lot of my suffering comes from judging myself and judging others. And if I can take a breath and be curious, and even just say, take a breath, tell me more, I move towards connection instead of breaking, right? I'm moving towards bridging instead of breaking. So I'd say definitely turning towards, and then this practice of just being curious, gentle curiosity is so important. And to practice curiosity towards yourself is foundational, but then, towards others, because judging, we need to have discernment is important and valuable, but I'm making a distinction between discernment and judging, and judging, really doesn't serve anyone, when we get into judgmental mind around others or ourselves. So how can we meet that with curiosity? This is all the inner work, the inner work that is so foundational. We talk and tell, so foundational to being a transformative leader. It's attending to our inner lives and doing this kind of inner work, moment to moment throughout our day.
I love that so much. One of the things that I say to myself, if I feel something rising in me and disconnection and frustration, I flip it into being fascinated by what is
Love
happening
that.
in front of me, because we are so fascinating, and especially somebody who doesn't see the world like you see, is maybe having a personal issue, but is in their behavior showing their pain. I mean, everything about that is actually fascinating, and also an opportunity to learn and grow. And I always say, if I put my head down on the pillow and I have learned something, then the day was a good day. And that's why we're here, to learn and grow. And you have absolutely helped us in that endeavor, Meena. I mean, this was an incredible podcast. I so appreciate it. Do you
Oh,
have anything that
I
you
have
want to
one,
Yeah,
one last thing I want to share with
please.
folks. The first is, so a couple last. The first is just that, in a lot of my work, and again, I was a classroom teacher, a school district leader for many, many years. Sometimes you'd hear the phrase, well, like, hurt people. But I want us to remember that loved people love people. And so if that can be my last message, when we are feeling disconnection and we recognize that someone may be acting out of harm and hurt, because folks they are acting out of harm and hurt, can we break the cycle? Hurt people, but love people love people. And the other is to just, if you want to stay connected, I have a lot of free resources on my website, which is just meenasrinivasan.com. Lots of articles, guided meditations, we hold this annual conference every year at the Omega Institute, and applications are opening for our 4th cohort of fellows in transformative educational leadership. They open on Martin Luther King Jr. Day this January. So you can check us out at teleadership.org. And just deep gratitude to you, Scarlett. I will never forget that fateful day. I was teaching 6th grade when your son and his classmates in his school experienced this heartbreaking tragedy. And I remember holding the circle with my students, and that, this many years later, here I am speaking with you as such a beautiful model for meeting tragedy with love and seeing it as a moment for even deeper spiritual practice and evolution, and then sharing that with the world. Profound gratitude to you. I'm so grateful to have a sister like you on the path. And may more and more educators choose love.
Mm,
It's going to change the world.
It's going to change the world. And I'm so blessed to be on this path with you, to know you. We will stay in touch and continue to work together to make the world a safer, more peaceful and loving place. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with the Choose Love community. And I know that we'll be back together again. There will be a part 2 to this podcast. There just has to be.
For sure. We're going to trust everything will unfold just as it should at the right time.
That's right.
Certain of that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for giving a space for me to show up in my fullness. I appreciate it. You take care, and blessings to everyone who is listening.
Thank you.
Hey, hey, oh. It's all part of us. We can all choose love. It'll lift you up if you let it in. Let the